We are here today having the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Ken Drude. It is October 12th, 2012. I am Kathy Gaw, and I'm accompanied by
Jane Woodrow.
And we're very excited to talk to you about the evolution of your professional career, as well as the evolution of psychology in Ohio and nationally, as mirrored by your career. Would you feel comfortable just giving us a thumbnail to start from about where you started?
Okay. Actually, I started, my initial expectation was I was going to have a career in archaeology, anthropology. And when I was doing some work before starting graduate school in a residential facility for kids in Illinois, near the University of Illinois, as a matter of fact, I decided I wanted to go into community mental health and got into the program at counseling psychology program, University of Illinois, and from there decided after graduating I wanted to go into community mental health, and that's how I got started. And most of my career has been in community public service kind of settings. So I started in a small mental health center in Newark, Ohio, and from there went to Children's Hospital in Columbus for a period of time, and then went to another community mental health center in Dayton, Ohio. Then another community mental health center in, actually from there I went to Wright State University School of Professional Psychology. While I was there for the school, I fulfilled a contract that the school had with the Department of Mental Health as the director of psychology for the local state hospital, Dayton Mental Health Center. And that's where a lot of the, at least a number of the graduate students from the School of Professional Psychology got clinical experience. And so we had actually students from University of Dayton master's program as well as doctorate level program people from Wright State. And my next change was to move to a job in Cincinnati at another large mental health center in the west part of the county in where Cincinnati is located. And from there came back to Dayton and worked in a social service agency where we did an outpatient program, did some some residential type work in nursing home. So it was kind of a wide range of working with kids, with geriatrics, with families. So it's a very diverse kind of population experience that I've had. And now, once that program ended, for the past 10 years or so, I've been doing private practice on contract for part-time. And that's kind of the evolution of that, and as part of that, gotten interested in a variety of things. During that time, very active in professional organizations, particularly local psychological association as well as state association, Ohio Psychological Association. And during the time that I was an OPA active there, I'm still an OPA, but during the time that I was more active in committees and the board, got very interested in a variety of things, and can talk about those. And since then, actually gotten diversified a bit and got more involved in some of the national kinds of things that other organizations are doing that are not discipline specific. So for the past few years, I've gotten more involved in the American Telemedicine Association that has a section for telemental health, and been very active in that special interest group and continue to be.
Wonderful. And when did licensing take place in Ohio in the course of your career?
Licensing was taking place at the time that I graduated back in 1972. Okay. I think the law was passed, I think in maybe 1972. And so when I arrived in Ohio for my first job, which would have been in 1972, that was the time grandparenting was starting, so I was able to get licensed in 1974. So during that first few years in early 70s, there was a lot of people that were getting grandparented in. I can certainly tell you more about what particular areas that you might be interested in.
Sure.
With OPA, I got started actually with the legislative committee. Early on, I was interested in the civil commitment laws actually there was a bill at that time that had been introduced into the Ohio legislature.
And that was when? That
would have been in 1973, I think. So
Okay.
That's how I particularly got interested. I think I had contacted the OPA at that time and talked with Henry Seaman, who was a part-time lobbyist for OPA at the time, and was invited, I think by him, actually to participate on a legislative committee that met in Columbus. At that time I was living in Newark. And so the following year I actually was made chair of that committee, and from then on I was much more involved actively at the board level, not just in the committees. So that got me started at the board level.
And was that when you actually created the position of the liaison for the state?
Well, after serving as chair and then co-chair of the Legislative Action Committee, at some point there was a perceived need to follow up on some of the legislature that had been passed, and so a new committee was created by the board, a state and federal agency liaison committee, that really the purpose was really to do the follow-up for how is it that these laws that are being passed are going to be implemented by the agencies that are going to implement them. So we got involved in the rules of how they go about doing that, and definitions of how to define certain things and how they were expected to be done. At that time, it was not just with the state, but also with the federal legislation. So at that time, there was kinds of things that were being certainly the rules that the federal government uses to implement those laws. And so I got very involved in regularly reading the Federal Register, which is not the most interesting.
I was going to say, did you sleep well at that period of your life?
That's an experience that you don't want to have, probably.
Wasn't it around that time that the community mental health federal legislation came down?
That was at the time that a lot of that was being implemented. The Comprehensive Community Mental Health Center approach. That was my first job. Actually, was in one of those centers, and so there was a lot of things going on at that time that I was interested in. Not just in counseling, therapy, but there were also lots of things in preventive work, education, consultation, a whole range of services that were included in the Comprehensive Community Mental Health Center Act, federal act. So so I got very much involved in that because at the time that there was a lot of promotion for that, and there was a lot of literature that the federal government was putting out related to all of that could be used in doing work in the community.
So prior to that act, what was there any community mental health kind of?
Well, it wasn't the
Services?
comprehensive kinds of things. I think it was very limited. And the idea with the CMHC, or Comprehensive Community Mental Health Center, federal legislation really was to implement a broad range of services to the community that weren't there. So a lot of places didn't have much to begin with. And so it was really federal funding for that, and states were implementing that.
And how have you seen that evolve over time?
Well, that has changed considerably. So, the idea was to try to get more services in the community, less dependent on state hospitals. There have been major changes in the funding, the way things have been funded. So, over time there has been efforts, the federal legislation, for instance, was not funded the same way for community mental health centers, so the comprehensive community health centers were really more dependent on state level funding. States have gotten into trouble with being able to maintain their levels of funding for a lot of things, including mental health. Lots of things we're trying to develop to deinstitutionalize, try to get people out of state facilities. So a lot of the kinds of things that have happened in what was community mental health has gotten much more narrowly focused on the more seriously mentally ill folks, and not the broad range community approach that initially it started out being. So in some ways it's very different than it used to be.
That is very interesting, and it sounds like the prevention piece is
prevention
pretty
gotten
much
lost. Education is pretty much gone. A lot of it, like I said, a lot of it is now focused on one area for people who need mental health services. Still, I think there's probably a need for certainly for people who can't afford, who don't have insurance, for instance, who can't really afford mental health services. So I'm sure there's a lot of unmet need that still exists, unfortunately.
Yeah, it really is focused almost entirely on the seriously mentally ill right now. Because they're not being serviced by the state mental hospitals that used to service them.
Right. So now, in terms of what I'm doing now, I see I'm doing part-time clinical practice now in a private practice that provides services to community, primarily funded through people's insurance, health insurance, and see the wide range of people that I used to see in a community mental health center. So I can see families, individuals, couples, some kids, teenagers, a broader range of folks that I have an interest in.
interesting.
And so how did OPA develop along this line of development we're talking about in mental health services in the communities? How did OPA develop along with all that change?
OPA has changed quite a bit over the years that I've been involved with OPA. Been involved with OPA both as a public service employee as well as a private practice practitioner. OPA has been, I think, very involved in both representing public service as well as private practice folks. I've always attempted to try to get involved with a broad perspective of people, of psychologists in OPA, which has been a challenge because there are various needs that people have that aren't going to always be met by one organization. But through the committee structure that OPA has, it always allows for, I think, some flexibility in meeting whatever needs come up. And there's been continuity for years, and that I think has been to the advantage of psychologists in this state, where I think there has really been a good organizational development that has been maintained for quite a bit of time. Although the people involved have kind of changed over time, I think there has been this continuity of being able to focus on what kinds of things are for public good as well as for psychologists to try to have a strong voice in trying to create public services as well as helping to support psychologists wherever they happen to be working.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think it has been about OPA that has allowed for that continuity across the years and across the evolution of psychology and mental health?
Well, I think there's been to a large degree kind of a shared vision of what it is that we ought to be doing as a profession in our state, and that I think a lot of the kinds of things that have gotten attention at the board level kind of show that there's been an effort to try to maintain that as people gotten interested in working with OPA through committees or being board members or committee members. I think people psychologists who participated can appreciate that. You know, what's this all about? It's can see where we've been, where we are, and where we want to be, and can see some purpose in what they're doing, and share that common goal, I think, of trying to develop the kinds of things that we think that are important and necessary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think you've been a visionary in that sense, having started
been involved so long.
Yes, and having
Well,
started some
consistently.
essential.
Well, OPA, I think, is in some ways has kind of shown the way for, even at the national level, something that other state associations may not have had the opportunity to do. I mentioned earlier that OPA was involved in some of one of the committees that I started was the State and Federal Agency Liaison, and that was a committee about implementing legislation. And as part of that process, not just at the state level, but also at the federal level, that would impact psychologists nationally, but certainly in Ohio. And so getting involved and looking at how is it that those kinds of things are going to affect psychologist practices. Examples would be, what kind of definitions are going to be used to include psychologists or not include psychologists? What kinds of requirements would there be? What kind of services would be covered in certain kinds of legislation? And so OPA actually prompted activity by the APA, the American Psychological Association, that wasn't there, right? Because OPA really was involved in doing some of these things before it became a priority for APA, before they even had a practice organization. And they only had one or two people involved, but at a very incidental level. So
Right, they were very heavily academic.
that's right. So this was before APA began really representing not only academicians and researchers. They were really there was a minimal kind of attention given to practitioners, and so I think what some of the things that OPA has done is really kind of pushed APA to start looking at, well, maybe we ought to get interested in that.
And
So I'm pleased that we've had a positive influence on our national organization rather than sometimes the other way around.
absolutely. Well, and I think more recently, what I've experienced is your starting the focus on telehealth, telemedicine, those sorts of things, and again, it has pushed APA, or at least contributed to their knowledge base.
Well, I'm pleased to see that even it's long overdue. I'm still pleased to see that APA has started the process of developing telepsychology guidelines, something that the OPA established in 2008 and revised in 2010. And that was part of, I think, an awareness that our association, at least our profession, is evolving, and that it's important that be recognized, and what are the implications that has for assuring that people are capable of providing the services of the future rather than continuing to do the things in the past and hope that's going to work. And so I think as telepsychology has evolved, or telemental health has telehealth and a broad range of health services that are provided remotely, including mental health, there has not our profession has not kept up with those kinds of things as they have evolved, and so there's been a real lag. And that was one of the things that was, I think, acknowledged by Ohio Psychological Association in creating a communications and technology committee. I think maybe back in 2000. I'm not sure when it was, 2003 or 2005. And it was early on recognizing that we need to help our professional colleagues to be able to practice by, helping them be informed, helping educate them, and then eventually recognizing that we need to help give them some guidance about what might be some appropriate ways to practice using distance technologies. Mm-hmm. And so that was outgrowth of that really was the telepsychology guidelines that were influential in the ultimate telepsychology rules that the Ohio Psychology Board developed in 2011.
And speaking of that, I think that one of the things I noticed when I got involved with the Board of Psychology was that Ohio has always had a very kind of close relationship with the Board of Psychology that promulgates the rules we operate by, and not an adversarial role. And I would go to meetings of the broader association of boards, and people were always amazed that we could talk to the association as well as other boards, that a lot of places have a real adversarial relationship between the professional organization and the the licensing board.
And my understanding is that really has been true since the creation of the licensing board, that the OPA actually was very much involved in actually developing the licensing law that was implemented by the board. And ever since then, there has been the relationship that you referred to, which has really been more like a partnership in trying to not only protect the public, but also to give guidance to practice of psychology in the state. So I think there's been some recognition of mutual interest that has been very beneficial to the public as well as to the profession in being able to develop the law and implementing the law in a way that I think has worked quite well and continues to, that the relationships that the state association has with the licensing board, even though it's separate and has different missions, there is still some commonality of purpose in that those can be to the benefit of both as well as the public.
And because you were recently appointed by the governor to the licensing board, I'm curious if you feel any shift in your focus or significant difference.
I see there's not really a conflict or there's not really a big difference. It just means that the role that I have now is shifted a bit, so that my purpose as a board member of the licensing board really is to implement the licensing law. And it means that part of the role of that means to try to educate folks about what are the kinds of things that we think are good practices, and to try to then to deal with whatever complaints come before the board for people who are identified as someone is identifying as this person's not doing something that they should be doing, or they're not practicing appropriately within standards that they're supposed to be meeting. But again, I think that there's not just it's not kind of just a policing role that's involved, and I think it's important to be, like I said earlier, to join with whoever can help implement the clarity about what sorts of practices are appropriate and how to help people, how to help psychologists in being able to practice appropriately and meet our professional standards. And that doesn't mean just trying to catch people doing something wrong. It means trying to also acknowledge what are good practices and helping people see that. So I feel that being on the licensing board is really kind of the next step has been the next step in my evolution of interest, and starting with guidelines and defining what are good practices and how to implement our code of ethics or standards, how to then implement the distance technologies with that. Next step really is to try to help implement that through regulations and policies of the licensing board that's responsible for the practice of psychology by licensed people, licensed psychologists in Ohio. So I'm pleased that I've been able to be a active participant in both of those, and look forward to actually helping folks work with the kinds of regulations that the board has already adopted.
Now, do you use a lot of distance?
I've chosen actually not to do that much. That's kind of ironic in some ways. I've been highly active in the policy aspects of telemental health and telepsychology, but I've chosen at a personal level to do face-to-face kind of work rather than doing distance technology. So I've become very familiar with how it is done by different people with different technologies, different professions, because there's a lot of commonality across mental health professionals in particular about how it's used. So I still find it very intriguing and very active with it, and see that it's going to be critically important for psychologists to recognize what they can gain from working with other professions who are also going to be living in a 21st century where we're going to be having to use technology in providing services at least some of the time, and we're going to have clients or people who want services who are expecting it. So it really is important for us to learn from others and to be able to use these kinds of approaches, tools, so that we can offer the services that people need. Otherwise, who may not otherwise have it through. It may not be accessible otherwise.
Well, so much of what we do is just with the people who choose to come to see us, and so we're missing lots of people who could use psychological knowledge, and
Right, there's some
disseminating it in a different way may be really
right. There's some
useful.
people who would not come, who might not want to be seen going to a mental health professional, for instance, who may be. It's too much of a barrier to have to make that appointment, to go in, to drive to wherever it is, not just distance-wise, but just psychological distance, and being able to make that kind of commitment, but who may be willing and able to do that through video teleconferencing, for instance. It may be that what they need may be many miles away. For distance, it may be impractical to expect that they're going to be able to travel, like particular areas like in the West, where there may be hundreds of miles for you to be able to find a specialist, for instance, particularly specialty areas. It may be difficult to find somebody who you really need. So how do you get that service? You can't expect that if they need it regularly, that they're going to be making this distant kind of trek to find it or to get it.
Right.
So I think if many people may choose, particularly I think older psychologists like myself, may choose not to change what they're doing, but I think it's going to be particularly important in training and education of new psychologists that this ought to be part of the curriculum. They ought to be trained in how to do telehealth, because that is the future. And I think younger psychologists are growing up in an age with technology where they've been using it. And so it's how might they use those technologies in a professional way, not just in a personal level or as a consumer, but how can they use those as a profession with providing services to people. And that's the challenge for our profession, really, that we still have yet to meet, and that is to develop the curriculums and to develop the training and experiences that are going to be key, important for our profession to be active as participants in the mental health professions in the future.
That brings up another issue, and that is that OPA has traditionally been heavily practitioner-oriented and has tried to ally somewhat with the academic world. How do you think they're doing on that? Because influencing the coursework is an important part too, from what you've just said.
Well, that's been a long-term issue, certainly in OPA. I know from the time that I started with the organization back in the early 70s until the present, there's always been that kind of how can we get the academic folks, education or folks involved with the organization. And we've always found, every time that's been looked at, is that the folks that are involved with universities and colleges frequently don't have the same kinds of interests and needs that the people that might be in practice, whether it be in hospitals, community mental health centers, or private practice. So that it's kind of hard to meet everybody's needs. When you have a large umbrella, not everybody's going to have their needs met some of the time. I think it's a matter of identifying the common kinds of areas that we both or all have a mutual interest in, and I think that is helping the people at the national professional organization as well as the universities and colleges be able to see that what the future looks like is going to be different than what the present and the past has looked like, and that means training and educating people to be able to practice in a bit different way. And it's mutually beneficial for the educational institutions because those are the people or places that are going to get that training. That's where the training is going to be should be done, certainly at the graduate level. And I'm not talking about just kind of workshop kinds of things or short courses, but I'm talking about fundamental inclusion, not as an option, but as a regular part of the curriculum. And those are the institutions that I think can see, if they can see that what the future is going to look like. perhaps they will be much more involved with that. But I think right now there's been a lag in being able to see what the future is going to look like. And so I haven't given up on the possibility that we can still develop a closer working relationship, but there still seems to be some difficulty in doing that, because I think we have different awareness of what we're going to needing to be looking like in the future. And I think that educational institutions, if you look at the curriculums, have not adequately trained our profession in terms of business practices, in terms of the tools that they need, in terms of how to be competitive with other people working in the fields that we're working in. And so I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done for that to change.
I think the Board of Psychology did a good thing when they met with academics about the rules for supervision that changed when the licensing law changed, so that you could get a license before you had a postdoctoral year, and the board did a really good job of bringing in the academics.
I think that's a good example of why it's so important to have a good working relationship with the people that are going to be affected by whatever kind of rules and regulations get developed, that they be involved in that at a very early level, so it's not a matter of those kinds of things being developed by one group and then saying, okay, here they are, what do you think? But if you can get involved at an early enough level and say, we're thinking about doing something that's related to this, it might be affecting you, and get involved at where it's our effort, not just some reaction to what somebody else has already done.
Right. So I'm hoping that went fairly smoothly as it developed, but it seemed to, at least initially, be pretty smooth.
Well, my understanding is that it's worked relatively well, and that doesn't mean that there's mutual agreement on everything, but I think when those areas of disagreement, there's been an effort to maintain respect and try to understand different point of views, and so that there has been an ability to come to some resolution when there has been some disagreements.
So again, we worked at not having a big fight between the academics and the Board of Psychology, just like we tried not to have a big fight between OPA and the Board of Psychology.
Right.
With good success, and I think that's another a good example of how OPA, I think, has been fortunate, and Ohio has been fortunate in being able to have those kinds of relationships that might be different in other states, where there's been much more adversarial kind of roles between the between licensing boards and state associations, for instance. And I think that's one of the kinds of themes that I can tell you that has been predominant throughout my history with OPA, and that is efforts to try to work together with other groups that have common interests, not just the licensing board, but any other groups that may have interests that mutual interests. And so it's trying to do that in a way that recognizes that other folks have priorities that might be different, but we can sometimes work together.
And I'm curious with your work with the telemedicine, where that does bring together a number of disciplines.
Yeah, it's been a very rewarding. I have been active with the American Telemedicine Association Telemental Health Special Interest Group for several years, and got involved in that through the OPA telepsychology guidelines, as a matter of fact, and presented one of their meetings in Seattle, Washington, and since then have gotten much more active with that group, and now chair a policy committee for that group. And that is an organization that, even though it says telemedicine, it really is telehealth. Telemedicine is an old term, and telehealth is a much broader umbrella than telemedicine, and so. that organization includes not just psychologists or physicians or nurses, social workers, business people, technology people, so that it's a much more diverse kind of population, which all have a common interest in telehealth. And so there you can see the common ground that we have. I think as professions, sometimes we get very narrowly focused and work in silos, and we don't see that there's a lot of commonality in what other people are doing. They're providing similar services, and that's a loss. That's a loss for us personally. It's a loss for us as a profession, because we don't learn as well from other folks if we think we're the only ones we're okay, and we don't need to do that. And by working in an interdisciplinary fashion, that's, I think, a much more, I was going to say appropriate, but I think certainly a much better way to be able to maximize what we can learn from each other. And so I find that that's been an enjoyable kind of experience in being able to see that people with common interests, and you're not bound by whatever little label you might be, what kind of, if you're a psychiatrist or this or that, and that kind of thing. I would hope that we could do more of that with our own professional organizations, and not always be so inwardly looking at ourselves.
And do you think technology will help us do that to some degree?
I think it certainly could help. I think just when working together, like the work that I'm doing now, for instance, one of the special interest group that I mentioned is currently working to develop telemental health guidelines for using desktop computers and mobile devices for providing telemental health services. And that group is composed of, a lot of them are psychologists, but other people are not psychologists. There's psychiatrists, there's some computer people involved in that process. And so we're kind of looking at it from different perspectives, and I think for that reason, it's a more comprehensive approach in whatever product we come up with, because it's looking at, what do we need to do this well, and to establish some clear practices, guidelines and practices that will be to the benefit not only of our group, but also in assuring the public that this is a quality way of doing this, and be able to be accountable for it. And by inclusion, I think we have a better result from our effort. And so that's been fun, and being able to, to kind of have an open mind and seeing things from different perspectives.
And then how will we disseminate that beyond the group that's having fun doing this? That's always a challenge, too.
I think certainly one of the things that we do in doing that is to, once we try to develop something like that, is to make it easily available to people, to try to promote that. Here's some information, here's some guidance that we can provide to you to be able to implement telehealth, or implement telemental health. It means as individuals that we need to go back to our own organizations and inform them. Here's what's going on. Here's the kind of training that people are getting. Here's the kind of tools that are available. Here's the kind of things that other people are recognizing that are as good practices. Here's the kind of research that's available that you can look at yourself. Here's some resources that you can use. So a lot of it is education and training, and I think it means that at an organizational level that we need to do that, but also at an individual level.
And I see these changes happening so rapidly.
Yeah, that's the challenge, is that this is happening at such a fast pace, that the lag is so great. It really is startling. And so I think all the more for efforts to try to continue to make it apparent that we need to get on the ball here. We need to get moving and dealing with this, because there is such a lag between what's good practices and what people are trying to do and struggling with. It interferes. It becomes a barrier for people to adopt are the kinds of things that are available for the benefit of the clients and patients that we can provide services to. And so it's not only just keeping those services out, it means that we're also then not getting the services to people who may need it, because people aren't getting the training, they don't know how to do it, they may be fearful that there may be some punitive action taken if they don't do it right. And other people may choose not to do it, that kind of service, and that's okay. But if you do, I think we have an obligation as professionals to help people know how to do that well.
Well, another issue that occurs to me is the economic issue. As you have new ideas about how to deliver practice, how will you make money doing it because of the way that the economics are structured through payments from insurance companies, for example.
Right, and this gets into the laws and regulations. So there's still a lag there, for instance, in that although there's been a fair number of studies that have indicated that telemental health works, that it is safe, that it does provide viable services that in many cases are comparable to face-to-face services, there is still a lag in recognition of that by insurance companies, by Medicare, for instance. But that's coming along. I mean, there are things that are happening. So that the Department of Defense, the Veterans Administration, those folks have been doing this for many years, and so they have a track record that we need to look at for providing those kind of services by other folks. And that means trying to get reimbursement so that people can afford to use it, because now most people who are getting telehealth services outside of the VA and outside of the Department of Defense are doing it out of pocket, because most insurance companies do not pay for that kind of service.
Right.
Some do on occasion, but generally don't.
And I think they've been ahead of the curve too with allowing people to practice in different states. If you're licensed someplace, you can work in the VA anywhere, I think.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's
not the case.
Those folks that work for the VA and for the Department of Defense are exempt from state licensure laws as long as they meet that one state that they're licensed in. It doesn't necessarily mean the one that they're practicing in currently. So yeah, there's been an extension of the exemptions. And you brought up something that's relevant, and that is the interstate practice kinds of barrier that still exists, because licensing laws are state by state or jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and so those are practically limit people practicing in multiple states unless they're licensed in those states. Licensing boards may see them as practicing without a license. So that's an issue, a challenge that that certainly the states have still struggling with. And have not resolved. One of the efforts is nationally to try to have some form of certification or licensure for mental health or health professionals that would recognize licensure in more than one state in a way that wouldn't require people to be licensed, having to go through the monetary process and all the cumbersome process to getting licensed in multiple states, that there would be a national board that would have some ability to certify folks being appropriate practicing. That hasn't yet happened, but that's been recommended by in the future. That's probably one way to resolve the kind of issue about how can we practice across states. Who's going to be responsible for what?
Do you have a sense of whether, the National American Psychological Association or the National Licensing Board?
Well, currently the American Telemedicine Association has advocated for federal legislation to create a licensing board. And in fact, I think it was Senator Udall was or has introduced legislation to create these certification boards, starting with physicians, but also then having other professions that would have their own certification boards. I don't recall what the latest is on that, but I know that's the effort, is really to create some form of national certification, which is a bit different than licensure. So I expect it will happen at an interdisciplinary way, and not specific to a particular discipline or profession.
Oh, that's interesting.
The problem is that state boards are pretty protective of their turf, so that is one of the barriers for trying to create something that's going to be across states. It really means that states need to learn how to work together better.
Well, maybe OPA and the Ohio Licensing Board can help with that as well.
I think they try to through this other organization, the ASPPB, and I always forget what all those letters stand for, but it's an association of licensing boards, and they do try to meet and have some kind of.
Well, I think the state Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards recognize that there's a need to deal with this issue, but they have not been able to come up with some consensus about how to go about doing it.
Right.
And so I think everybody's kind of done their own thing or done their own approach to how they want to do it. So they're kind of stuck. And have not yet caught up, and as they're stuck, the technologies and the people that are involved with it keep evolving pretty quickly. So the problem becomes even greater because the pace is happening. So while nothing's being done by those licensing boards and regulatory people, practices are going on, and so that's becomes more of a problem.
I work with children and teens, and I see within them an evolving different sense of confidentiality, privacy, those kinds of things, and I wonder...
Yeah, that's an interesting point. That's part of what's happening with technology, is that the whole concept of confidentiality and private has changed radically, certainly over the last 10, 15, 20 years. Is much different kind of concept now for people who've grown up with being able to readily communicate over the internet or even by telephone, so that they're now, I think, a big difference between generations about what is private, what is appropriate, even for professionals using social media, for instance, whether it be Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook, or whatever. There's a lot of, I think, as people grow up or learn from their personal experiences in their personal lives. They think these are natural kinds of things to share and communicate, and may have some difficulty in seeing how that applies in a professional, where that might not, you're not following the same kind of standards or rules, and that you're held to a higher standard. So I think that's part of our need as a profession, to be able to assure that folks are getting that kind of orientation, acculturation, and awareness that yes, things have changed, but that means that you still have to maintain confidentiality. And what does that mean? And that is a challenge, I think, for us to assure that we're clear on what it does mean, because it's somewhat unclear, particularly with social media. And it may be as simple as, how do you use Google, whether you Google your clients or whether they Google you, or if it's okay with them to Google you, can you Google them? I mean, those are things that people are doing already, and we don't have clear guidance necessarily in all of those kinds of questions that come up related to that. But I think just knowing that this is an issue, talking with your clients about it's going to be important. So, letting them know what's okay, not okay, and what your understanding and expectations are, and see if there are differences, for instance, because there may be big differences.
Yes. Have you seen your thoughts shifting along those lines?
Yes, I think just trying to draw some boundaries about, professional boundaries about where does my personal life and my professional life begin and end, and trying to establish what does that mean as far as what I'm going to communicate and how to communicate it on the internet. Just knowing that if you do anything on the internet, it's no longer private. And I mean almost anything, because whether it's your email, whether it's comments you might leave on some forum someplace, or a blog or whatever, those things can be searched by anybody, anytime, anywhere, for forever, perhaps, because once it's there, it's there. You can't take it back, whether it's a picture, whether it's a comment, or whatever it happens to be. And I think that's something that people now may not fully appreciate, in that it's not just something that's there for now, it's there forever. Until somebody decides some way to get it off, because people can send that on and duplicate it, and it can be, it's not just limited to being in one place once it gets out there. So those are things that people don't fully appreciate now, And I'm not talking about just the general public. I'm thinking people, young professionals may not fully appreciate it and really need to. And that's why I think, when going back to training and education, why it's so important, I think, for people that are involved in training and education, they need to be informed. They need to be the ones that are also being aware that, oh, this is something that's changed and different. We need to make sure our people we're turning out as future psychologists know this.
Yes.
So you find out, you talk about it.
Yes.
Raise their consciousness about this, and be careful what you put on your Facebook page.
Right, right.
Right. Even as a
It's an issue that's not unique to psychologists. It really is one of all health professionals. This is real challenging, and then we're still in a stage of it evolving as to how it's going to get dealt with. So there are folks that have put out some policies or some guidelines about how to do it, how they're doing it, and raising the question. So we're in process of trying to get clarification of that collectively, not necessarily limited to psychologists.
So do you find yourself projecting into the future about how psychology will look?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot more diverse than what it has been in the past. I think it means a lot more opportunities and things that haven't been thought of as before. I don't think it's going to be one way or the other. I think there's going to be more variety. And I think it's going to allow for people to do a little of this, a little of that. You don't have to be a specialist in one particular area necessarily. So to me, it's very intriguing. I think it's going to be a lot more opportunities. But I think it does mean that people are going to have to be more flexible in how they view themselves and how they function. I think people are going to need to be trained differently. They're going to need to have different kinds of not just the educational training part, but the clinical part. And they'll need to have opportunities to learn how to practice in ways that are going to be different than we've been learning in the past. Not just some of that needs to happen, but they also need to have other kinds of things to meet the needs and demands of the future, because things have changed, and if we don't change, we won't exist as a profession. So I think it'll be very different in some ways, and I'm not sure what it's going to look like.
It's very exciting.
Certainly,
and overwhelming.
But it's something that is very attractive to many people, to think that you are being trained for something and you don't have to do just one thing for the rest of your life. You can keep changing focus. And that was one of the things that attracted me to psychology in the first place, was that I thought, oh, you can do more with that than you can if you're just stuck teaching, for example, or...
Absolutely.
I think a lot will depend on what happens to the bigger healthcare field, because that's rapidly changing. So I think if we look at what's happening at the federal government level with healthcare, that'll make a major impact on what psychology is going to look like in the future. And how a lot of that's going to get implemented will affect whether or not we're going to be partners or whether we're going to be pushed to the side. And again, I think as a profession, we've been slow in getting ourselves involved in that. So we're at risk.
Yes.
So there's some risk involved right now. I think a lot of uncertainties about what to expect in the future.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, this is...
So we've been talking for about an hour. Shall we consider wrapping it up, or what?
I think we...
Or do you have some more things that you want to share with us that you haven't gotten to share yet?
Well, you got me off on one of my favorite topic areas.
It's wonderful.
Oh, good.
It's
Good.
wonderful. Yeah. Well, and it's
Well,
just...
I guess I would say that I would. One of the things I've learned is that if you have interest, if you have commitment, you can do a lot as a profession, not just our clinical profession or training, but I'm thinking just my association professions think of that as kind of a large part of my professional life is my work with local professional associations and state and national organizations, and that has really helped me evolve as who I am as a psychologist, and because I've become more aware of the bigger world that I live in, rather than just the work that I do day to day. And that would be one of the things I would want to leave people with advice to how important it is to see yourself as continuing learning and being open to experiences outside of what you're comfortable with, and to seek out other kinds of opportunities and talking with people and learning more, because you never can learn too much.
That's wonderful.
That's very good advice. I think too many people just get stuck doing what they do and aren't continually expanding.
That's called non-adaptive behavior.
Okay.
Well, I think
we're glad you've been so adaptable.
absolutely, and thank goodness you've been willing to share that with the Ohio Psychological Association, the American Psychological Association, the students at Wright State, just on many levels. I think
It's been fun.
Yeah.
yes,
And more to come.
Okay.
fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you. It's been an honor.